Please state your full name and swear either an oath or an affirmation. May it be starting with you, Mr. Dianthus.
Yes, I'll be swearing an oath. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
And your name and position?
William James Day Antes. I'm the Deputy Convenor of Pyrmont Action in this case.
Thank you. And Ms. Meade?
My name is Suzette Meade, and I'm the spokesperson for the North Parramatta Residents Action Group. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would either or both of you like to make a short opening statement, limited to about 2 minutes? I know you would, Ms. Meade. Would you like to start?
Try to stop her.
Oh, no, I can see. I can see the grin. Please start with you.
Okay. Thank you to the committee for inviting me in today. I'm here as spokesperson for the North Parramatta Residents Action Group, which is a membership-based corporation run by volunteers. Our objectives are to promote the preservation and activation of Parramatta's heritage buildings, landscapes, and enhance the historical, cultural and capital of our city. I'm also here to give voice to the 3,600 people that have so far pledged to support the CFMEU Green Ban and stand in front of the machinery with the community to protect Willow Grove and St George's Terraces from demolition, and the 13,984 that signed a petition in 2018 asking the Premier not to bulldoze these much-loved parts of Australian heritage. Lastly, but most importantly, to passionately promote the popular alternative proposal of a museum at the Fleet Street Heritage Precinct, also known as the Cumberland Hospital Precinct, which would deliver more to Parramatta arts and culture and long-term tourism future. We object to the design and location of the Parramatta Powerhouse as it currently is proposed by the New South Wales Government in the EIS. While we strongly support more arts and cultural investment in Western Sydney and believe Parramatta deserves a world-class museum, this should never come at the expense of its cherished heritage. It is ultimately unacceptable to me that any museum should destroy Willow Grove and St George's Terrace. The member for Parramatta speaks about there being hundreds and thousands of buildings like Willow Grove. This is not true. In Parramatta, there remains just one. Willow Grove is the only Victorian Italianate villa in the Parramatta CBD. Willow Grove was built in 1891, not the 1870s as stated in the government EIS. From 1879 to 1953, the site has been owned by a succession of entrepreneurial Parramatta business women in their own right. This is exceptionally rare. In the wider context of Parramatta's extraordinary heritage, Willow Grove is part of a sequence of women's sites unmatched anywhere in Australia. In February this year, our group reached out to the CFMEU to explain how much the wider community love these two heritage buildings, and in our desperation of not being heard by the government to stop their plans to demolish them. In July, a green ban by the union was placed on the demolition of both these buildings. This was supported by the National Trust of Australia, Historic Houses Association, and most recently this month, the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association have also thrown their full support behind this campaign. The City of Parramatta Council has always had the future development of the river, with Willow Grove central to its design. Council's 2016 River Strategy and Civic Link, which was to create a pedestrian link from Parramatta Square and open up the river as an entertainment precinct, retained Willow Grove at its core. Now the government's proposal not only seeks to wipe out Willow Grove, but it lacks that connection with the River Strategy and the Civic Link. Parramatta City Council's resolution in the 14th of January 2016 stated that it be noted, if the government insists or forces the location of the Powerhouse Museum on our river foreshore, it will result in a negative impact on Parramatta City Council, its vision as a river city, and this is the only parcel of land our council can develop and invest as a public domain that will be beneficial to residents and businesses. Further, that the option of the Powerhouse Museum being located on the riverbank foreshore will lead to financial implications for Parramatta City Council and its businesses. In the Parramatta Advertiser that week, it reported that all councillors were against the museum being built on the old David Jones car park site, which we obviously know as Phillip Street Riverbank. Councillor John Chidid, the former Lord Mayor, said, "The riverbank is the only parcel of land we can do something with for the community." Councillor Chidid said the government had not properly consulted with the council about possible locations for a museum. Why come along and disregard the local views and businesses when it comes to a museum location? Councillor Chidid said. Councillor Bob Dwyer, our current Lord Mayor, suggested the museum be moved to West Meade, and Councillor Glenn Elmore preferred to see it located at the old Parramatta Jail. Not many people know in May 2016, just weeks before the state government sacked councillors and put in place the administrator Amanda Chadwick, there was in fact a determined development application for Willow Grove to become the temporary council chambers for 5+ years while the new council chambers were being constructed. Parramatta residents have been excluded from any meaningful and genuine consultation about what we want in a museum. In 2017, we were given a one-night only opportunity to express what we want in a museum. I attended this event at the Parramatta Park Royal, and apart from Mr David Borger, who was in the room, it was an overwhelming call for museums to celebrate our great Indigenous and non-Indigenous history as the cradle of the nation. However, the results of this consultation don't seem to have evolved into the proposal. The next time we were offered consultation via the form of a push poll survey was March 2020, the week of COVID pandemic lockdown and total school closure. Infrastructure New South Wales pushed with an online webinar, despite our letters to Infrastructure New South Wales and the Planning Minister, that this was an inappropriate time to be carrying out such a process. We were not asked what we want for our museum, but we were told what we were getting. Anytime people on the webinar tried to express what they wanted for Parramatta in a museum, and if it wasn't the government's promotion, it was told it was a done deal, and the consultant said, "I'm sorry that you feel that way." To be blunt, it was insulting. Museums thrive best when they enjoy popular legitimacy and support from community that they are meant to serve. There are better locations for an iconic Parramatta museum that do not destroy heritage, but in fact complement it. We urge the government to consider the state government's 26-hectare Cumberland Hospital campus. This is an exciting potential to maximise the precinct for Parramatta's community and a vibrant tourism destination, which represents our First Nation narratives and also our forced migration to Australia. We don't understand why, as the Premier State, we are not, instead of splitting an existing museum, filling a void of a museum about our state's enormous First Nations history, our forced migrationary history, and our evolving, diverse, free migration of our new Australian stories. This is what international visitors travel around the world to experience. If this model was adopted, it would cost less, but deliver more for the people of New South Wales. It's time the government ditch this bad idea and encourage them wholeheartedly to be visionary and create a legacy for New South Wales' cultural future.
Thank you. Mr Ianthus.
Sydney nearly lost the rocks to Stalinist towers in the early 1970s. Almost 50 years later, the New South Wales government developed new plans for selling and leasing public land for overdevelopment in Sydney. They decided to flog off the choice land occupied by the Ultimo Powerhouse Museum complex, once described by Lucy Turnbull as one of the jewels of the cultural necklace encircling Sydney. The original plan seems not to have gone far beyond just transplanting the contents of the powerhouse from its home and heritage in Ultimo to some unknown location in Parramatta. Later, it was announced that the new powerhouse would be built on the site facing the Parramatta River. This is considered by many experts to be too small and, worse, flood-prone. It was somewhat surprising to me that the government didn't backpedal and suggest that the Maritime Museum be sold up the river on barges to an artificial harbour in the David Jones parking lot. In the same warped logic, I could expect Parramatta's government house to be floated down to Sydney and converted into a high-end function centre on Pinchgut Island. To get a better idea of how this thought bubble of a project was conceived, I recommend that the inquiry again watch and listen to the evidence, including the pauses and non-answers given by previous Premier Baird. In this case, we're hoping that the fierce expert and public opposition, the findings of this committee, the context relating to the powerhouse staying in Ultimo, and plain common sense will prevail over political aspirations and Treasury avarice. The Harwood building is not yet secured. Some members of the community believe that the bid to grab the entire powerhouse property in Ultimo was an ambit claim, and that the Harwood site was and is the major target of the government and developers. The structure was originally built as tram sheds, but also served as a temporary museum while the main powerhouse building was being repurposed. It's now used to service the powerhouse by providing storage, preparation, and repair of exhibits. UTS and other hungry developers need to look elsewhere for sites to devour. The Powerhouse Museum needs the Harwood building. Parramatta is not a regional city. It's a growing metropolis with its own important perspectives in Indigenous colonial government, agriculture, early European, as well as later migration histories. Even the inadequate business case and the incomplete community consultation provided by the government did not naturally suggest acquiring the powerhouse for Parramatta. Like Sydney, Parramatta will have to fight to retain its historic buildings and sites such as the Women's Factory with the surrounding buildings. All are undeniable heritage value. These and other buildings are in great need of preservation and defense against high-rise contamination of their sites. In addition, cultural possibilities should be investigated with and by the local community. The consultation process should be provided with commensurate funding by government. Under the embarrassing circumstances of this whole powerhouse project, and especially after the New South Wales state election where pledges were made to the electors of Western Sydney to construct a cultural entity in Parramatta, the New South Wales government should fund a cultural project requiring a similar financial investment to the one promised. The expense of moving the powerhouse from Ultimo to Parramatta should be used instead to fund the required repairs to the powerhouse that were raised earlier in the sessions of the inquiry. The powerhouse should better promote their recently renovated Powerhouse Discovery Centre in Castle Hill. It's only 11 kilometres from Parramatta, and continue to ensure the regular loan and or exchange of exhibits with other smaller museums in New South Wales. I can personally attest to the benefit of exchanging exhibits between museums. My grandfather helped establish the Mystic Seaport in the U.S. state of Connecticut. That museum donated the 19th century whaleboat on permanent loan to the National Museum, Maritime Museum here in Pyrmont. Starting from 7 years old, I had spent many hours in both museums learning about seafaring and the oceans. Finally, with all the attention being given to the powerhouse, the importance of even the existence of smaller museums with their volunteers and other staff in regional areas should not be forgotten. My grandmother, on the other hand, added depth to my knowledge of colonial New England and the American Revolution by taking me around the smaller museums and pre-revolutionary era homes in Connecticut and Massachusetts, many of which are staffed by volunteers. We need to support all our museums, whatever their size. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Yes, Ms. Meade, so where does the Cumberland Hospital campus fit in relation to the Fleet Street precinct?
So the current site is a Cumberland Hospital East Precinct. Yep. That's its official name. But we've adopted it as the Fleet Street Heritage Precinct because it sits on Fleet Street, and there's a lot of heritage in there.
So we're talking about the same thing?
It is the same thing. So
I just wanted for clarification in our recommendations in that.
Yeah, and there's also people who say the Parramatta Female Factory Precinct, which only is 7 hectares of the 26.
So your submission or your proposal is that you support a powerhouse museum in Parramatta, but you'd prefer it at the Fleet Street Precinct / Cumberland Hospital campus.
Well, we support a museum that celebrates and promotes our great history of Parramatta. I don't think we need to prescribe to a name. We've obviously adopted the Museum of New South Wales because I'm pretty sure we're the only state that doesn't have one, and we are the premier state. But that doesn't prescribe the whole site to just be about the Museum of New South Wales. We've got the living history. You could have brand new modern buildings with travelling exhibitions and art galleries and technology involved in it as well, because it's such a big site. It could have lots of small themes to it.
Okay, but I'm trying to sort of, we make recommendations
Sure.
at the end of the process.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure that the spirit of you're supporting the green ban on Willow Grove and St. George's Terrace because you don't want to go ahead there. Therefore you want a museum at the Cumberland site.
We support the green ban on those two buildings because they're an exceptionally important part of our social fabric. We believe that the Cumberland Hospital Precinct / Fleet Street Heritage Precinct is a much more suitable site because it's larger, it's more accessible, it doesn't flood, and it has a wonderful narrative there which you can build on as an experience that you can have tactile learning about.
Yep. So how strongly do you feel about the two heritage buildings? What would if the government seems determined to demolish them, what would be your response to a proposal to remove them?
Well, they will see me in front of them, standing in front of the machines, is my immediate response. Along with thousands of other people, we've been inundated with people offering their birth certificates. As we know, it was a maternity hospital for 3 decades, and we've had people calling us. I had a woman come up in the street to me and give me a whole portfolio the other day from the Nurses and Midwives Association to say her mother was born there. I'm having calls from builders in Cumberland that, heard something on the radio that said, here's my mobile number. I know I'm 7 hours drive away, but I appreciate these buildings and I'll be there. So this is far beyond Parramatta now. It's become a bigger campaign, and these buildings are important to Parramatta's streetscape. They're important socially as well as architecturally.
But the government has said, okay,
Yep.
I'm just going to be devil's advocate here. The government said, this is not my view, but there are hundreds of thousands of buildings similar to these.
Not to the
I
government.
don't think they quite said
Did I say hundreds of thousands? I meant to say
Yeah.
thousands.
So Jeff Lee said there are thousands
Sorry, there you
of
go.
these buildings.
Jeff Lee.
Jeff Lee said
Dr.
they're
Jeff Lee.
basically unimportant,
Dr. Jeff Lee.
replicated
hundreds of
everywhere and
thousands.
Put inverted
dispensable.
commas
That's what he
around
said.
doctor, but Dr.
No,
Jeff Lee.
and that is incorrect because there is only one Victorian Italian at Villa in the Parramatta CBD that remains. Originally there would have been a lot of them along the riverbank there, but this is the only one that does remain. It also has an exceptionally large frontage to it and a very important landscape.
The curtilage of the building, of the house, is just as important as the house itself.
Absolutely. And when we're talking about heritage and suggestions of moving buildings to other locations, which I believe was suggested by Infrastructure New South Wales to the CFMEU, I think we forget that it's the importance of a place socially is its setting and its stories of where it's placed in that area. Like, you wouldn't pick up and move other, heritage or much loved sites to other places and expect that narrative to remain.
Thank you, Ms. Meade.
I wanted to ask Ms. Meade about the proposition that I think has been put forward by Parramatta Council in relation to their vision for the site on the river as a public domain, and why that is important in Parramatta, why the council and the community would want that space as open space, as green space, as public domain space.
They did sell it, didn't they?
Who?
The administrator.
The administrator sold it.
The unelected administrator,
The money.
Amanda Chadwick.
I've asked a question.
Amanda Chadwick
And got
sold
the
it,
money.
unelected.
Yeah.
Ms.
Anywho.
Meade,
Would you like me to answer the question?
I would like you to answer the question, please.
Apologies on behalf of the entire.
Order.
I like the way you stood up for yourself there. Sorry.
Unlike me, right? So in 2016, the council ratified their river strategy, which marries up with the Civic Link. Now, that was a slow process of purchasing the properties from private owners along Phillip Street, and that was a connection with Parramatta Square with I think a 29-metre wide civic link from our Parramatta Square, which has finally got off the ground, coming down and having this great pedestrian link down past the beautiful Roxy Theatres, Spanish Mission architecture there, coming down and looking at Willow Grove. And that was your end journey, and it was opening up to the river. And along Parramatta River, we've long seen the backs of buildings. Like, the river wasn't something worth celebrating. And that's what Parramatta Council want to do, to open up the river, to celebrate the river as an end point, but a very important place to hold Parramatta Council's burgeoning cultural activities, because they have Paramasala, the Larkathong, the Winter Festival, and there's very few public squares and spaces that Parramatta Council have that can hold these crowds now as we get bigger. The Prince Alfred Square, which is opposite the Riverside Theatres, doesn't have any amenities in it. It's very small. We're getting more popular. Our activities are getting more popular. And this was going to facilitate these larger events being held in Parramatta in a central location, because at the moment, the only other larger space is Parramatta Park, which council have to lease at great expense. So not having this great asset is, I guess, I can imagine is what Councillor Chidid at this time was saying, is that they're not going to have that space for themselves as their own asset to hold their cultural calendar, and they will have to seek other land to lease to hold those.
Ms. Meade, what kind of budget do you think may be required to realise the full potential of a museum of New South Wales?
Well, as I've submitted with our submission, is the business proposal that the Treasury, New South Wales Treasury, asked me to prepare after I reach out to them in April. And I asked to meet with the Treasurer to discuss an alternative vision that will cost less to the government but give more to the people of Parramatta culturally. His staffer called me about 36 hours later on a Sunday and said, "That's great, could you come in?" I came in and met, did a presentation. I was told not to waste my time talking about the current proposal because they agreed it wasn't a good one, and that I should just talk about what I foresee as a better option. And then I was asked if I had a business case. I said, well, I can reach out with experts and put one together, but it's not going to be, a big, long business case. And I reached out to Lionel Glendenning and Jennifer Saunders and asked them to help me prepare, as obviously architects and experts. I can only give the passion and the community view. And we prepared a costing of $450 million in the Cumberland Hospital Precinct, which would be a rollout over 4 years, but not waiting 4 years for something. It would be a slow rollout of expenditure of no more than $100 million per year, and lots of openings, lots of ribbon cutting, and bringing people to the site in stages instead of waiting. And I believe that's more fiscally responsible. I think it's culturally more interesting for Parramatta. I think it's more open green space for Parramatta, and in pandemic world and going forward, we're going to have more of these outdoor spaces and these cultural events that are in more open spaces. As we found out during lockdown, they were the places that we turned to and we had to enjoy because we weren't allowed indoors. I think this would also possibly, hopefully, give more money allocation to the Riverside Theatres, which appears to have fallen off the back of the wagon so far in progressing.
Can I just ask a follow-up question just about the Cumberland site?
Yes.
Because I just want to be clear that the footprint does provide some capacity for modern development as well. It's not purely historic, because I think that obviously there is a substantial collection at the powerhouse, a lot of which is not on display at all at the Ultimo facility, and that the idea of trying to bring some more of that to the public gaze, to life, is a good one. And so just wanted you to talk a little bit about that, the potential for a mix of old and new, I suppose. It's not just it would not just be a historic
Absolutely not. No.
museum at Parramatta. There would be that potential for old and new. Is that your vision?
Yeah, so the proposal that we put forward, we looked at a really interesting architect called Sejima, which is a Japanese architect, which would be very, I guess, interwoven and serpentine buildings that sort of wrap around the existing heritage buildings there, which would, reflect the river and reflect our First Nations stories. And we could have these big new juxtaposition of new structures married in with, there's over 77 buildings that can be repurposed on that site. And the history of this site is about repurposing. It started as the female factory for only 22 years. It then became the Parramatta Asylum.
The female factory makes up
7 hectares of the 26, yes. So that's the National Heritage Core. That's World Heritage listing is being campaigned for. So, that would be your living museum experience and adaptive reuse buildings. But the rest of the site...
I've got to say, I've been interested in what I understood from previous submitters, whether it be this inquiry or the former inquiry, that we were talking essentially about the women's factory being the site.
Yes.
And at the same time, there's these proposals for World Heritage listing. And I wondered how consistent seeking to obtain World Heritage listing was with these proposals for building a museum on the same site. It seems to me, if you talk about space being as much an issue, the place being as much an issue as the actual fabric of the buildings, then listing for World Heritage purposes may not be consistent. And this is not to argue against the use of the rest of the site.
It absolutely is consistent because the site's 30 hectares.
Well, that gets...
And you've got 7 hectares of the World Heritage proposed site, and then all the way down to Parramatta Jail, you've got this open space with older single-level buildings there. Not all of them are...
Again, I'm not disagreeing with you at all in this regard. You're really talking about using No,
the whole site. The whole site. The whole precinct would be a destination of mixed cultural arts, community-based centres in some of the buildings for Parramatta community theatre, for theatre rehearsal spaces, and then some start-up hubs in some of the smaller buildings, like an Abbotsford convent. And
I think we might be talking across purposes. I think I understand what
I know what you're saying, that you think a new building might jeopardise the World Heritage listing. Is that what you're saying? I think the Parramatta Light Rail might have more of an issue of jeopardising that than a future new build that would be at the other end of the site. Because it's a very, very long site, and what we're talking about with the World Heritage is at one end, and you've got a much further expanse to build in other areas that wouldn't jeopardise the borders of the proposed World Heritage site. But it would be a symbiotic relationship, because, as I think Kylie Winkworth was saying, bucket lists for travellers are World Heritage sites. So, you get these people that want to come to the World Heritage site, but then, hey, we've got this modern new museum down here for, the kids that don't want to go to that. And you can return because it's multi-layered. And that's what you want. You want people coming back and back and back and staying for a weekend. And sorry, I'm very excited about it. I'm very passionate about it.
Can I just ask both organisations, as community organisations representing grassroots interest in both proposals, both sites, what level of consultation you've had with the government over the proposals, meetings with representatives of the powerhouse, meetings with government ministers? Have you been satisfied with the level of engagement over the proposals with the communities that you represent?
Is this a Dorothy Dix question?
Yes, it is.
Welcome to committees.
No.
Got a surprise last time when they had me.
I've attended every one of these
had
sessions, usually sitting in the front row. And as I said, the most interesting one was the ex-premier, and where you were able to ask questions and you weren't getting answers. It was very telling, I thought.
Yeah, it's
And,
question time, not
certainly-
answer time.
Yeah, we haven't been able to convince too many people other than ourselves, but the community, as in people who are involved with government, to even take what we're saying seriously. They really did pick the wrong museum, because the local groups, both Pyrmont Action, Ultimo Village Voice, CUPPA, which is a combination of all, the Blackwattle Bay Coalition, all of these groups are dead against moving the powerhouse because it's an integral part of the whole area. It belongs where it is. It is a powerhouse, after all.
And in relation to the business case for the Ultimo site that is now in development, subsequent to the announcement on July 4 that some form of a powerhouse will be staying there, has there been any consultation with you and the other residents groups about the development of that business case?
They don't believe that the government is serious with leaving the powerhouse there in a reasonable form. The Harwood site is of most interest at the moment in the community. They're saying we need to keep that, and that any change to the way in which the powerhouse is administered or run is not good for the area. The Castle Hill Center is another form of powerhouse, and there's no reason why that can't be used as it is and promoted as such.
And Ms Meade, any views on the adequacy of community consultation from the Parramatta residents?
Well, as a general, as in my opening statement, we've only had two opportunities. One was an hour meeting in 2017, and then the recent one in 2020, which was a postcard that was sent out advertising a webinar. But that was right in the middle of when the Premier told us, don't send your kids to school and stay at home. The push poll there didn't give any opportunity, any characters to write what you wanted. It was a multiple choice question with, questions like, how would you like Willow Grove and St George's Terraces remembered?
You actually said that.
Yeah, and I've got the screenshots of the push poll in my appendices. Actually, that question they changed the survey 10 days in and added questions, which we also questioned the Planning Minister, how the accuracy of that survey could be, because they changed it midstream. But obviously the answer was we'd like to remember it by keeping it there. But there was discussion of a garden or a 3D video of what used to be there. But people felt very restricted. They did invite, well, look, you can send us an email if you want to write further. As far as meetings, I've always sought meetings. I've met with Minister Harwin twice in 2017. He's just accepted for me to meet him again in 10 days' time via Microsoft Teams to discuss the business case that I prepared for Treasury. Minister Stokes, however, won't see me. I've made about 8 requests to see him this year to discuss Cumberland and the process of consultation during this period, and I've not had a response. We've made a presentation to the Parramatta Lord Mayor yesterday. So look, we plan to make a presentation hopefully to the Parramatta Chamber of Commerce shortly as well. So we just try to talk to as many people as possible, and I keep knocking on doors hoping for conversations.
I wondered about the views of the community in relation to the status of Willow Grove and St George's Terrace based on the commitments that were given prior to the last state election in relation to those historic premises and what subsequently played out. How does the community feel about I suppose that that change of heart, that change of tone, that change of policy? And, does the community feel as though the commitments that you were given prior to the election have been honoured?
Absolutely not. Obviously, people felt very let down, that they felt there was a promise of, safety for these two buildings to remain in Parramatta. Parramatta Council have passed 2 unanimous motions to support the retention of these buildings as they intended to. The fact that there's been no consideration of how important these are has really upset the general community. And of course that follows on from a lot of destruction leading up to this point of, a pub older than Perth with the Royal Oak Hotel that really didn't need to be knocked down if there was a little bit more interpretive design with the light rail line. That really hurt people in Parramatta when that went down. And obviously we're still waiting for a pool. And so now it's like, now you're taking Willow Grove from us. It's quite emotional out there. And you can stand, which I am very often around Willow Grove, and people will wave at you or beep the horn as they drive past going, good on you. And, it's... People have come to take it for granted, this beautiful green space in Parramatta, because council were always going to keep it in their future. And the fact now that it's going, people are really angry and people are really upset. I have old ladies emailing me going, I'll come down and I'll stand there. And I'm like, okay, I'll let you know. So there's...
Do you think it'll have a political impact on the re-election prospects for Dr. Lee?
Well, if you listen to Ray Hadley, who seems to be quite passionate.
Ray Hadley's got form in things like that, yeah.
He started talking about greyhounds and promising to support anyone that ran against Geoff Lee if Geoff Lee didn't change his mind. So there are a lot of political discussions about this, but...
But what do you think the prospects will be? You live in that electorate?
I do. Look, I think it's the straw that broke the camel's back now, because, as I just mentioned, we've had a succession of community outcry for stopping of our heritage being demolished, and the fact that there is another more appropriate site that's widely supported by communities and experts to go to, it just seems totally unnecessary, and I think people are ready to rise up.
Ms. Meade, so where does the Roxy Theatre fit into this?
I just mentioned that because it's actually on the Civic Link, the walkway that is opening up. People will walk beside that as they come down from Parramatta Square and then reach Phillip Street and Willow Grove. So, of course, that's a wonderful Spanish Mission unused 1,500-seat theatre right now, which, of course, could be a wonderful addition to our cultural future as well. There is a lot of suites of heritage in Parramatta, which is why we have the National Trust on board. We see Cumberland as, the octopus head, and you've got Old Government House, Elizabeth Farm, Experiment Farm, the Roxy Theatre, Willow Grove. There's all these places that you can go out from and have that collection of returning visitors to Parramatta. I sound like the tourism board, don't I?
Actually, I was like, good jobs for a...
Well, we really need a strong tourism strategy in Parramatta beyond Bankwest Stadium.
Should get a new member.
Well, Shooters, Fishers and Farmers might have to run a candidate there. You never know what might happen.
There are some foxes around there.
I'm sure there are plenty of foxes there. And rabbits too. Any other questions?
A few white elephants? No, sorry.
Well, the white elephant hasn't quite got started yet, but I'm happy to go if it does.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much for coming today, and your input's been fantastically valuable to us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Cheers.
Good to see you all again.